Good day, everyone. My name is Lebogang. I'm a master's student in economics at the NWU. It is my honor to welcome you all to the 2021 Northwest University's Race Awareness Week. It is particularly important for us all, not just economists, to consider the relationship between race and the economy. It is necessary for us to recognize progress that has been made in South Africa to uplift people who have been previously disadvantaged. The World Bank's Overcoming Poverty and Inequality report shows us the latest available data, which indicates that around 2.3 million South Africans have escaped poverty between 2006 and 2015. While the coronavirus will have worsened the state of poverty in South Africa, especially along the lines of race, it is worth reflecting on the gains that have been made. But there's still much to be done. Just before the pandemic in 2019, we still had massive inequalities in terms of unemployment. Black Africans were reported as having 43% unemployment rate. Colored people were reported as having 30.1% unemployment rate. Indian people's unemployment rate was 20.6%, while white people's had only 9% unemployment rate. Startling statistics are also reflected in earning differentials, where Black Africans on average still earn less than what half of white people earn in South Africa. So too, a breakdown of the Black African workforce reveals that 18% are considered skilled workers, while in the case of whites in South Africa, the skilled workforce is 61%. These statistics emphasize that 3 centuries of colonialism and half a century of apartheid have left South Africa with massive challenge of changing the structural inequalities embedded within our economy and indeed our society. One of the main reasons for us hosting these cross-curricular events during RAW is to augment our learning outside of the classroom. This week is an opportunity for us all to learn, wake up, and to reflect. We encourage everyone attending the session to acknowledge that as a community that encourages intellectual discourse, that we need to ask the hard questions, but that we always remain respectful. That we push to understand better, but also know when to listen better. That you embrace being comfortable with the uncomfortable. As you watch the contributions made by the various speaker or speakers in each session, please feel free, not just to type questions, but even your thoughts and reflections in the chat box. You don't have to wait for the discussion section of the session. Please contribute via text from the moment we start with the session. If you are enthusiastic about unmuting your mic, you're more than welcome to raise your hand. If time allows, the facilitator will encourage you to unmute yourself. We hope that for each of you, this session will be the start of a conversation that leads to action just beyond Race Awareness Week. In closing, the patterns of race representations as well as gender and class demonstrate the longevity of racialized hierarchies of privilege in our country. Approaches to regulate, stimulate, and steer the economy are critical matters to contemplate as a university community embedded within broader South Africa. We look forward to your engagement. Enjoy, geniet het, itumele, lethabeng le rona.
All right. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for that introduction video. My name is Carike. I'm a lecturer at the School of Economics, and you are all very welcome in this session. Thank you for joining us today for this discussion of Ferial Haffajee's book, What If There Were No Whites in South Africa? Before we get going, please allow me a minute just to repeat some reminders and arrangements for the session. So as you just saw in the introductory video, you are encouraged, you are very welcome to share your thoughts, reflections, inputs, or questions in the chat function here in Zoom while the discussion is taking place. You don't need to wait for the Q&A session to do that. And if you would like to raise your hand to unmute yourself and make an input, please feel free to do that, and then we can share some thoughts during the Q&A session. Also, just a reminder that all of this week's sessions, including today's session, are recorded and they will be uploaded to the NWU's YouTube channel. So if at any point in the future you would like to refer back to this discussion or any of the other sessions that happened this week, they are available on YouTube so that you can continue accessing the knowledge shared in these sessions. So for today, I will be opening the floor by sharing some of my reflections on the book. After that, I will hand the floor to my colleague, Ms. Roslyn Lodewyk, so that we can hear some of her impressions of the book. And we will also be chatting to student colleagues, Josh and Lebo. Right? So that's what we have to look forward to during our session. So I have a copy of the book here with me, and I first read the book when it came out. I think it was around 2015. And I remember at that time being very impressed by the book, and especially by Ferial Haffajee's ability to raise tricky questions in a sensitive and balanced manner. I know that the title of the book is very provocative, but after reading the book in its entirety and in its full context, which I do encourage you to do if you have the time, it's my understanding that there are various copies of the book available through the university library. After reading the book in its fullness, I do think that Ferial manages to strike a balance between, on the one hand, definitely not shying away from the many challenges and inequalities that still remain in our economy, and on the other hand, asking critical questions about the type of narratives that we are willing to adopt about these challenges that remain. So for me, in the end, I think I experienced this book as a kind of call to introspection for the country at large, because Ferial repeatedly leaves us with questions about not only how we are relating to one another, but also about how we are relating to our elected leaders and policymakers. And I will expand on this a little bit later on by sharing and reflecting on some direct quotes from chapter 1. I do just want to state explicitly that when I do share those quotes, I will be shortening them in the interest of time, because I find that Ferial's writing is such that I could easily just read pages aloud to you, which is not the aim of what we are wanting to do today. But when I do share a quote, I will also share the page number of where that quote is coming from, so that it is possible for you to refer back to the full quote for context. But before doing that, I did want to start first by reading you the preface to the book. And I thought that it's important to state this at the beginning of our discussion in Ferial's own words, because I noted from the Google registration documents that many who are attending the session expressed the hope to gain, as an outcome from this discussion today, a bit of clarity on the issue of what South Africa would have looked like if it had not been colonized. And that is unfortunately not what Ferial is discussing in her book. So if you'll allow me to read you the brief preface in Ferial's own words. She says, "My dear uncle, Mac Karim, was instrumental in making me see South Africa differently, and not only through my jaundiced journalist's eyes, looking out only for what's wrong and not what's right. Early on in my editing stint at the Mail and Guardian, he said, 'Geez, first, sometimes it's a wrist slitter,' in reference to various editions. So now he's expecting this book and said, 'What an interesting question,' when he saw the title. Sorry, Uncle Mac, this book doesn't answer the question, what if whites hadn't colonized South Africa? I intend to become a historian someday, but this is more a work of contemporary study, and then only of our freedom years. I guess there are some who might answer my question this way. If there were no whites, this bloody country would go down the drain. It's not that book either, thankfully. And still others might answer, and it wouldn't be a moment too soon. It's not that book either. I prefer to think of this as a love song to a Mzansi I love dearly, and as an attempt to see the possible. So they're just ending Ferial's preface to the book. And so, as I said, this book does not leave us with any clear answers about what South Africa or Africa would have looked like if it had never been colonized. That is actually a very tricky exercise to do, because finding an accurate counterfactual for colonization is very difficult. And that just means that it's really difficult to find examples in history of places that hadn't been colonized, so that we can compare them to places that have been colonized and see how outcomes differ. Right. So for those who are interested in that particular debate, I'm just quickly going to type into the chat. I'm sharing a link here, which is a blog piece from the LSE. And the blog piece references a bunch of studies dealing with this issue of the various outcomes of colonization. And so perhaps if you're interested in that particular debate, maybe you'll find some interesting reading in that blog piece at the link that I've shared with you. But as Ferial herself said, this is not that book, all right? In my understanding, what this book is it's about challenging the idea that there is one single easy solution to all of our problems. And in particular, Ferial really takes a lens to the issue of redistribution, right? She does not deny that redistribution can and has played an important role in reforming our economy. But she also points out that we seem to be hearing a narrative which makes it sound as though Black poverty and inequality can be fixed only by or simply by redistributing white wealth. When in fact she takes a look at a few numbers throughout the book, showing that even if all white wealth were completely redistributed, this would make a very small dent in Black poverty. Ferial points out on page 21, this is a direct quote I share, the trouble with a narrative that believes South Africa comprises equal numbers of Blacks and whites is that it creates a false expectation that sets its store in wealth redistribution rather than in wealth creation as the path we need to embark on to secure better Black lives, end quote. And then towards the end of chapter 1 on page 29, she again reiterates why she questions this narrative, particularly as she discusses the debates surrounding Black versus white ownership of the JSE. And she states that such narratives, begin quote, enable the creation of an amorphous other in whites to keep an enemy that is easier to fight than crippling corruption, unemployment, and a wealth gap that require deeper leadership than our political class is currently capable of, end quote again. So then to summarize, I experienced this book as an invitation to dig deeper into understanding our current policies and to contribute towards future solutions that really deal with the complexities we face in our economy, rather than wishing them away. As Ferial states on page 17, what if there were no whites and Blacks and coloreds and Indians? Besides these constituent parts of us, there were also 280,545 people called other in the most recent census, I guess permanent residents. We are here on this beautiful, troubled corner of Southern Africa, and none of us can be wished away. It is our simple truth, end quote. So that just from me, a brief summary of my experience of the book. I thank you very much for your time. And then I'd like to invite my colleague, Ms. Roslyn Lodewyk, now to share some of her insights.
Roslyn, I think you're still on mute. Hashtag the motto of 2020.
Sorry for that. I'm a bit technologically challenged, but anyway. My thoughts on the book. I'm a tall person with a very short story, so I'm not going to be very long. But as I was reading this book, I was also flabbergasted with the title. But then something just told me, go a bit deeper, go into it, and go and see what the author actually wants to reveal to us and tell us as the readers. And as I was reading through chapter 1, I just want to open with this one quote from Ferial's book. It is on page 1. She states here that I was asking the manager something when a woman came straight up and proceeded to tell him about blocked toilets. No, excuse me, no, nothing, I objected, because that is what growing self-esteem does. And she proceeds by saying, I wasn't rude. I merely stepped out of the role she had planned for me. And in doing so, I upset the pecking order she had grown up with me, that has grown up with me. I was invisible to her, except roles she had come to expect of people like me. So that was one section that caught my attention, because being a colored woman in South Africa, you go through things like that. So that gripped me a lot. But my thoughts basically with regards to the book is I saw it in a way that the writer was very objective. The writer was trying to draw us in as the reader to develop like pictures on what does she actually want to say? What does she want to open to us as South Africans? What does she want to reveal when we look at the different races with regards to South Africa? What also stood out to me, she spoke about the injustices that happened in the past, that now the power roles have shifted. But although people have power in their hands, they have the power in their hands, but they don't make the decisions that will really impact us and better us as South Africans. So that was something that stood out to me also. Another quote that was very real to me that she wrote in on page 2 is I think it is now plus 20 years that we have been living in a white suburb. And there was something that was very triggering to me when she said it on page 2. She said, my neighbor in Parkhurst rings the intercom. Hi, Muriel. There is 5 years on and I am Muriel. I sighed. I've given up. I've worked it, dropped notes, dropping cakes, saying hi. Where I come from, neighbors know each other's stories and lives. So basically, she said she still had to make herself like to be visible. I am here. I'm staying with you in the same suburb. But how I saw the book is the writer wanted to broaden our perspective. There is this injustices, but what are we going to do to better on these injustices? Because we have the knowledge now, we have the insights now. Are we going to refer every time back to what happened in the past and not go like, how can I say this, work together to better what we are currently going through in South Africa? I stated here in some of my notes that actually what I took out of the book, she wants us to be open-minded. There is problems, but can't we take these problems in, like I stated before, and better on them, so that when the generations come, that they can come and find a different South Africa, rather than a younger and newer generations coming and say, but the past affected us. We couldn't better our lives because the past affected us. What are we going to do with what happened in the past and better our lives, or better South Africa for the future? In my last note that I made is that although they say the title of the book is What If There Were No Whites in South Africa? My thoughts personally is that we are interdependent of each other. We need each other. We need each other so that we can be successful in South Africa. That was just my view and my thoughts in reading this chapter of the book. So it actually made me think. It actually made me dig deeper. Am I a young South African going to go back and every time refer to what happened in the past? Why don't I take what happened in the past and build on something better so that it can better the generations to come? So my thoughts were a bit different, but this is what some of my thoughts were with regards to what I have read out of the book. I'm going to give over to Lebo.
Okay, so I feel like my fellow colleagues have already said most of what I actually planned on saying, but yeah, I'm going to reiterate, as I believe that the fact that we all saw this, it means that yeah, it's actually important. So I'm first going to start off by reading some quotes which stood out to me, and then after that I'm going to give my own personal perspective of these quotes that personally stood out to me. So on page 17, the author says that non-racial struggles for justice always saw race, but understood that we have to move beyond race, ethnicity, and tribe to construct a human consciousness and a national consciousness. Somewhere in the past 21 years, we lost the meaning and purpose of non-racialism, and it has congealed into a nasty race consciousness. What if there were no whites and blacks and coloreds and Indians? Besides these constituent parts of us, there were also 280,454 people called other. We're here on this beautiful, troubled corner of Southern Africa, and none of us can be wished away. It is our simple truth. The author on page 18 also further moves on to talk about Black South Africans thinking that there are higher numbers of whites in South Africa. However, yeah, in retrospect, there are more blacks than there are whites. So this notion that Black poverty is as a result of or contingent on white wealth is actually an error. We're not thinking about this properly. With regards to what Dr. Claassen said about income redistribution, because whites form like such a little part of our country, even if they were to redistribute, it wouldn't actually make that big of a deal or that much of an impact because of the unequal, percentages. The author asserts that we have problems. We have unemployment. We have poverty. However, we need to move beyond this. We need to move beyond racializing these problems, but actually taking them as problems, because majority of South Africans are Black. So we can't racialize it. We need to move beyond this. We need to find solid solutions. We need to stop pointing fingers. Yes, we were colonized. Yes, we suffered apartheid, but we need to move beyond that. Yeah, and stop every time referring back to this is because of this and that and that and that and that and that. Income redistribution shows that we need to move beyond this. It's not going to make that much of an impact. So that's what I gathered from this book. I feel like, yes, it strikes a balance. It shows that all these things happened. However, some good has happened over the years. Why aren't we, celebrating the emergence of the Black middle class? The fact that there are positives to this. We are always focusing on the bad. Yeah. So Yeah, that's my personal contribution, and apologies if I reiterate it. Yeah, but that's, yeah, what I got from that.
Hi everyone, I'm a panelist that's just going to continue after level. I hope everyone can hear me. So I learned from Michelle, my development economist lecturer, that it is always good to give context. So a part of that context is just on the author herself. So Ferial was born in 1967. She grew up in Bosmont, which is, which is a suburb in Johannesburg. Her and her family initially grew up quite poor. Her father worked in a clothing factory, but one of the quotes from Ferial's first chapter is that she has hefted into the middle class since such time, and I think that's largely attributed to her own contributions in her life and her own accomplishments, rather. So she was a graduated from Wits, and then she started as a cub reporter in the Mail and Guardian. She also acted as the paper's associate editor. She also she sporadically was an economics writer. She also worked in broadcasting, particularly with the SABC. She was a radio producer and television reporter. I think it's also important to highlight some of her accomplishments. In 2014, she was awarded the International Press Freedom Award by the Committee to Protect Journalists. And then also she obviously wrote this book in 2015. Currently, she is associate editor in the Daily Maverick. So my takeaways from the book, like my fellow colleagues have reiterated, the book's title might scare some people away, but largely I think there's always takeaways, so that they don't feel shy to not read the book just because of its title. There's really some good nuggets of truth and lessons to be learned from the book. So I prepared my pieces on chapter 1 and 5 of the book. That's what we were going to be talking about. So in my opinion, the first chapter, Ferial tries to reiterate the contrasts that exist in South Africa. So these contrasts were primarily when how the economic and society during apartheid functioned and how it is today. But then she also reiterated some more ideological contrasts in perspectives. So with African South Africans, some still have the impression that they're oppressed by a white supremacy, whereas others feel that they are truly free under a black majority government. I thought that was quite striking, that there can be such ideological contrast, that some still feel oppressed and others feel truly free. That was one of the main takeaways from chapter 1 for me. And then also the last line of her chapter was the most impactful for me, where she reiterates that people and politicians it's much easier for them to create divides racially than to try to solve South Africa's socioeconomic problems. And obviously that is an easier task to achieve because we do have such challenging socioeconomic issues. But I also wanted to focus, sorry, I just came in. I also wanted to focus on some of the numbers, and that was presented in chapter 5. So the main focus for me there was how the majority of South Africans are still hopeful. I think that's one of our, we can complain a lot as South Africans. I think that's quite a unique South African trait, but we can also be very optimistic people. We're always hopeful. So 56% of parents believe that their children today will be better off, have a better standard of living than they will when they reach their parents' age. And I think that's very important, because if you contrast it with other countries like America, she highlights, or the author highlights, countries like America and Germany feel that their kids will have a worse future when they turn their age. Whereas in South Africa, we're still optimistic that our children will have a better future. And also just on that point, some of the numbers, there have been profound changes or improvements in poor families' lives in a single generation in South Africa. since democracy, whereas in America, it can take up to 4 generations for a poor family to reach the income of an average family, which I think is quite startling. I think it also contributes to how there is hope that there can be improvements in such a short space of time. There's obviously a lot of work that still needs to be done, but there is improvements being made. Some of the other startling facts and figures from chapter 5 is that the South African elite, which can be defined as those who earn above 40,000 rand a month, only constitutes 4% of our population. And of that 4%, 60% are white South Africans and 20% are black South Africans. So obviously improvements can be made there. But also some of the positives that she highlights is that 317 billion rand has been invested into, or worth of deals have occurred from 2001 in BEE companies. And that's only looking at the top 100 BEE companies in the country. So that number is obviously a lot higher. But some of the more startling figures is the land audit that was performed by Claassen. So that revealed that 67% of the land ownership was held by white commercial interests, whereas 15% is held by black traditional or communal property authorities, and 10% is owned by the state, and 8% is urban areas. So I think there can be large improvements there. But the main takeaway of the book for me personally was to become introspective as a white South African. She highlights that she's grown up in an African culture and African ruled governments her whole life, and she is truly accustomed to Africa, as it were. But as a white South African, what have I done to improve my climatizing to Africa? And there's more that I can do. I can take part in panels like this, for instance, where we discuss these issues. And I think that's the main point for me. This book highlights that there's more we can do as white South Africans just to become better and more accommodating of every culture and ethnicity within the country. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Josh and Lebo, and also Roslyn, for your input. Lebo, I just wanted to check in with you quickly because I see that your hand is raised.
No, I just wanted to add with regards to the improvements that Josh is talking about. I feel that it is important also not to forget that in as much as we're hopeful, in as much as we want to move beyond, racializing everything, we also need to take into cognizance the fact that for white people, their salaries, they earn more than half, Black Africans earn, lesser than their white counterparts. In fact, white people earn more. How can I even, put it into numbers? Basically, in essence, Black Africans earn less than half of what their white counterparts earn. So we need to, in as much as we're hopeful, in as much as we want to, be better, we need to, think about those aspects. And as white people, you must ask yourself, is this fair? I feel like you have to allow yourself to be convicted in the workplace. Yeah, that's all I have to say.
Thank you so much, Lebo. I just want to reflect that back to you because I see Precious sent a comment in the chat that links up to what you've been saying. She says, even though I agree with Lebo to some extent, I do feel we should acknowledge that getting over more than 300 years of colonialism in just a little over 25 years is difficult. We really can't just easily get over it like that because the effects of apartheid and the inequalities it brought are really deep-rooted and tragic. But I do feel that we are on the right track in fixing some issues. We all need to work together to create a better South Africa for all, regardless of race. And then a little bit earlier in the chat, I just wanted to highlight that because it sounds quite interesting. Thank you so much to Bakang for sharing another book recommendation. Even though there are some inequalities in SA, there is also some good happening, said better in The Upside of Down, a book written by Bruce Whitfield. Yeah, so some reflections in the chat, which I think is again reiterating this need for a balanced perspective. Michelle?
Michelle's hand is up.
Michelle, do you want to unmute?
Yes, I can do so. I don't know, Carike, because I don't want to be necessarily I'm organizer, but also really interested in the discussion that we're having today. So I don't know if we could maybe quickly just want to reflect on Christine's comment, and then I can give my contribution.
Okay, let me just scroll up here. Thanks for pointing that out.
Yeah, sure. It's over here, 10:37.
Sometimes it's a bit difficult to keep up with everything in the chat. Okay, so Christine let us know in the chat. She said, we can't change the past, but we can change the future. I grew up in KwaZulu-Natal and always had a very soft spot for the AmaZulu's culture, beauty and language. When I studied isiZulu and Setswana were two of my majors, as well as Afrikaans Dutch. I grew up in a multilingual community with friends all over the spectrum. Even today, we can learn so much from each other. We have so many skilled people, but somehow we miss each other because of race, past history. It's such a shame. So thanks, Christine, for sharing that in the comments. I also just wanted to quickly from my side reflect on that before passing back to Michelle, if that's okay. Lebo and Josh's inputs about the call to introspection, which I think happens across the book, but also particularly and towards the end of the book, you get that opportunity to read the entire book, addressing white people specifically, where I think Ferial does a very interesting job of pointing out the two sides that were kind of settled on, after the 94 transition, and that there was an agreement that there would be a peaceful transition, but that came with a question specifically to the white community about meeting each other halfway. So there is peace, but has enough been done to transform these inequalities that remain? And that is something that she does explicitly invite us into later in the book. Thanks, Michelle.
Thanks so much, Carike. So I know that we have a lot of participants here in the Zoom room with us today. And I know that a lot of your expectations and hopes for the session, that we're really grateful that so many of you were willing to share that, is that you just came because you wanted to listen. And so I really do just want to emphasize that no one has to contribute necessarily, and the session doesn't have to carry on for an hour and a half long. This is really about reading through a piece of material. We made available chapter 1 on the Fundi site, and as I say, the whole book is available on all 3 campuses. So no one has to feel like they have to contribute, but I would really encourage everyone who did sign up for the session and has made the time to feel that this is a comfortable and safe space, whether it be, for the comments that come through in the chat, or if anyone wants to raise their hands, you're of course, you're more than welcome to do that. And I think everyone that signs up for a session like this and that has come here understand that we need to push the boundaries and we need to ask these difficult questions, but at the same time, we want to be respectful. And when introspection happens, it can often be really difficult and confusing. So I suppose that's kind of the point that I wanted to share here myself. So when I had originally read this book, I was actually Carike's student, and now I am a lecturer in economics on the Vanderbijl Park campus myself. And so I'm really proud in this moment to see Josh and Lebo, who are both students of mine, I think really being the type of South Africans that I think at least everyone who joins this type of a session wants to be, is to ask ourselves questions as white people, firstly, about our white privilege, about how we interact with people of different races in this country, And so I won't profess to speak on behalf of people of color in this session, necessarily the questions that they should be asking themselves. But I would, again, be really keen for anyone to share that. This is not a case of, well, you know, the panelists are all knowledgeable, and we're just here to kind of, through the process of osmosis, give you our knowledge. I always say this in my classroom, but we're really hoping for discourse around this. Of course, this recording will be available, so if you in your own time want to go take a look and, you know, email me or any of the panelists, you're more than welcome to. But I think something that I really do want to emphasize from what this book is talking about, and I think as an economist, part of the discussion that we have to have more broadly, is to acknowledge that there is certainly not one answer to this, right? To the answer of, well, what if there were no white people in South Africa? Just the concept of multiracialism, and that Ferial is talking about, you've heard one of the quotes, is heavily disputed. Part of what we're discussing in all of the different Race Week sessions is, can non-racialism actually exist? Is that useful or helpful in South Africa? Is it more useful for us to take a look at something like multiracialism? How do we ensure that we aren't, because by all means, you know, there have already been opinions that have been raised today about, like, well, we just need to try to, like, look at the future and work together. And that's definitely a massively important part of how we begin to navigate what the future of South Africa looks like. But I would emphasize that I think we need to be very careful about finding the balance between acknowledging, and I think Precious was also talking about this, you heard about this in the intro video, acknowledging the realities of the inequalities that have been created, particularly in our country, because of colonialism and because of apartheid. And that this push for us moving forward should, I would hope, never be this push where we are not cognizant of the massive inequalities that there are, whether it be the statistics that you've heard Josh talk about, Lebo talking about, you know, 43% unemployment among Black Africans, but only 9% among white South Africans. And that we need, I think, as white people, to be asking ourselves questions about, what does it mean for us to think about redistribution in South Africa when the overwhelming majority of our tax base is white and relatively well off in comparison to the majority of South Africans that are people of color? What is our approach to when we're deeply upset about, oh, well, if you earn more than 1.5 million rand, you have to pay 45% tax and you're deeply unhappy about this? I would really be keen for us to have conversations about taxation in South Africa, the kind of a rhetoric that we see about how upset we are about a wealth tax in South Africa. And what does that mean for us as white people, who are in most instances the ones that have much higher incomes and have much more access to wealth through, you know, assets and owning private property? If anyone is interested, you know, we had a whole session on land reform. So if you guys weren't in that session, the recording will be available. But I really think that it is important for us, just as white people, to ask ourselves these questions about, are we comfortable with the uncomfortable, which is the reality of grappling with our privilege, and asking ourselves, what can we actually contribute to South Africa? And does that mean that we should be more open to things like a wealth tax, more open to things like the national health insurance, to ask ourselves very hard questions that may make us really uncomfortable about white privilege. So anyway, those are just a couple of thoughts that I wanted to throw out there. I see that we've got quite a few comments in the chat box. Yeah, thanks so much.
I just want to add something to what Michelle was saying. It's actually a question that I want to throw to the panel. Although we are talking about wealth distribution among all the races, I have an HR background. Now, what skills are we going to teach the people if we distribute the wealth equally? What skills are we going to teach them to maintain that wealth? Because I saw somebody saying in the comments, I just want to get to that comment. I don't know who the person was, but they said that, yeah, here's the person, I can't pronounce the name, but anyway, the person said, for me, I always wonder if we should blame apartheid in today's day and age. We have been led by a Black government for so long. Are they not the ones who are letting us down as Black people? So my thinking is, we Black people are in power, but what has, it's only my thinking, the white people, what have they done in order maybe just to teach skills or mentor or coach them? This is how we keep things into structure. This is how we're going to divide wealth equally, because we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 10 skills to do that. So that was just my thinking, because I have an HR background. Yeah, I was just thinking that.
Thank you, Roslyn. If I may, if it's okay if I jump in, because I think there are actually some things coming through in the comments that link up nicely to what you're saying. And so thank you, Precious, for this comment. I'm just going to read it. Even though the efforts we have been making in the country to erase the effects of apartheid, I do still feel the efforts being made are very small and makes little stride, especially in dealing with institutionalized racism. Access to good education is still very skewed. Good schools are mostly being taught in Afrikaans, for example, here in the Fall Triangle. Salaries are a secret because people that are on the same level earn differently based on race. These are discussions that have to be faced head on. And I think maybe, Roslyn, that can tie into what you're speaking about. And it also reminds me of something that Ferial discusses herself in the book, in the chapter that we haven't been able to share, where she speaks of these kind of invisible skills or privileges that often is taken for granted if you're a white person. So she talks about when she started working, and she comes from an Indian background, and she all her life had been used to eating with her hands, or maybe only a fork, and how difficult it was for her to negotiate business meetings that happened at fancy lunches. And, you know, these kind of, skills that are very valued in the workplace, which some people are able to take for granted. And for others, she then discusses how she had to kind of teach herself these unwritten rules of the game later on in her life. So I'm just wanting to reflect that back to the panel, and to thank Precious for making that comment. There are also other comments that people have made about this importance of addressing the past before being able to move on. So I don't know, I think I'll just pause at this point to see if there's anyone who wants to make another contribution or react to
that. If it's okay, I think Betsimang's question is a really great one for us to discuss a little bit more deeply. So again, I don't want to be too much of an economist, but you know, the economics is a really broad science actually. So Roslyn, got a good, Josh, Lebo, please feel free to jump in, and anyone in the chats here, please do so. So, you know, I think it is important for us to also acknowledge the discussion about political power that has been handed over to a liberation party in the form of the ANC. But as you know, Precious has been emphasizing, to also ask questions about where economic power is housed in South Africa, and then to really reflect on whether 27 years is enough to be able to reshape this. And so, you know, we've heard some statistics about how we're seeing improvements in whether it be where we have the number of Black managers that we have in positions of power. We're seeing that there is, it's not nearly big enough, but we are seeing that there is at least some increase in the Black middle class. But so I think it's maybe worthwhile for us to think about the way in which political power and economic power interact with one another, and whether vested interests that previously under the apartheid government had been inculcated because of white nationalism, how easy it is, but rather how difficult it is to be able to extricate that, which is where the idea about introspection comes in, right? Where white people in positions of economic power need to ask themselves some very serious questions about what does it mean to share that economic power. And so I understand that that is obviously a massively difficult question, but I do think that it is useful for us to think about the differences and then how they do relate to one another between economic power and political power. Yeah, so I just thought I wanted to emphasize that interdependence and yet the division between the two.
Thanks for raising that point, Michelle, and it once again seems to link up really nicely to something that Richard has just shared in the comments. The question of whether we can blame apartheid is an extremely difficult issue, related both to structure, things outside of the ANC's control, and agency, things under the ANC's control. The political economic factors of the 1990s left much outside of the realm of what sort of transformation was possible, but they also themselves just very quickly abandoned a lot of the social justice promises they'd made before their election and leaned into extremely anti-poor policy. So there's a lot of blame on the SA, the ANC inherited, destroyed by colonialism and apartheid, which destroyed SA's economy through mismanagement, oppression, and corruption. But there's also a lot of blame to place on the ANC at the same time, again, some aspects of mismanagement, oppression, and corruption. So thank you very much for sharing that input. I think it ties quite nicely to the point that Michelle was raising.
I don't know, Josh or Label or Roslyn, if you guys want to jump in. Otherwise, I just wanted to read some of the other comments that have come through in the chat. So I think Christine has made a great contribution here about saying that she's extremely positive about this discussion where people can speak in a safe environment. Usually we tend to talk to our own race about these issues, but not with the people who are viewing the same issues from another viewpoint and another race. Yes. Oh, I see that we do have a hand. Tech team, if you guys would just take a look at being able to unmute Mario. Then Mario can make the contribution verbally. We can discuss that a little bit and then I'll go back to the comments. Thanks so much, Mario. Mario, I think, okay, you're unmuted now.
Okay. Thank you very much for this discussion. I think when I registered, I looked at the topic when it says that what if white people were not here in South Africa? And I found it to be a very interesting question. And I've also listened to most of the discussion that we had, for example, with regards to our past and all that, which is, it's not something that we can have one answer to it. But the reason why I wanted to come in is because I think one thing that we are missing on all this is the issue of power. Power is a commodity. And, you know, I work a lot with gender-based violence. And every time I feel like we're dealing with the symptoms instead of the real issue when it comes to gender-based violence. Because the issue there is also, you find that is power. If I'm the husband and I was always providing, and all of a sudden, maybe I don't have a job and my wife is providing, she needs to start making decisions. And now in South Africa, white people were in power. All of a sudden, black people are in power and they need to make decisions. That makes it difficult. But the problem that I feel continues we continue to have in South Africa is that we are not working as a team. We are not collaborating. White people are defending their own territory. Black people want to come in, but it's difficult to come in. So it makes it so difficult. And then you have ANC there, which is busy with corruptions as well. And then we, as spectators from both black and white, we are there judging them. But you find that, and the other thing that I feel we don't contribute is that's us academics. Because I think we are sitting behind, we don't want to be involved in politics. And we are allowing people with not even a degree. I went to a municipality recently to query something. And then I just look on the wall and I found that person only have some certificate, maybe it's for 3 months certificate. But he's a manager in that room. in that building. He's the manager. He makes decision on behalf of us who are educated. So I think at the end of the day, if we can find a way where we can say, let us start working as a team. Let us start working, collaborate instead of being spectators and judging others. So ANC is not doing us good. The past will always continue to haunt us as long as we are not working as a team. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing that input, Mario. I just wanted to highlight, sorry, Michelle, I know you were also maybe still busy with an input, but there, just needing to scroll back to get it. So Claudia just sent us a very important reminder in the chat earlier about saying, as scientists and academics, we need to refrain from using words like all, everyone. Thank you for sharing that reminder, Claudia. And of course, yes, this is where it gets really tricky and complex, right? And why I often wish I could just read you whole pages of Ferial's book, because again, I just wish to highlight that is something I feel Ferial manages to do really well. She is very good about distinguishing where she is able to speak from her own lived experience and why her own lived experience might not be the same as, you know, a different woman's lived experience. So yeah, the book itself, I think, deals, in my perception, well with that, and just something for us to also keep in mind.
Awesome. Thanks, Carike. Roslyn, I was going to ask, did you maybe want to...
I just wanted to read something in the chat box where Carike said racial equality can be or can occur when institutions give us equal opportunities to people of all races, regardless of physical traits such as skin and color. So that refers also a bit to what Mario said. Another thing that also caught my eye in the chat room is from Christine de Toit. Perhaps we should start with education. If we can change the way people see teachers as seen in countries such as Finland, China, etc., where they are really recognized as playing a crucial role in literacy development and preparing children to become educated and responsible citizens, and really see teachers as professionals and not looking down on, then we can change the teaching profession as a specializing profession that needs really qualified persons to help growing children in competent adults. So it's basically just what the chat box is showing me. There's people coming with solutions also. So that is actually something very good for me, what I'm seeing at the moment.
Thank you so much, Roslyn. Lebo.
So one other thing that I want to highlight that we got a bit into in yesterday's session. So yeah, as we're talking about, okay, yeah, I'm gonna, yeah, digress, but yeah, when talking about the emergence of the Black middle class, I believe that sometimes we don't consider the fact that at times they are first generation graduates. So in as much as, you know, improvement is taking place, we should not, forget the fact that they have relatives behind or immediate family members that they have to provide for, you know, so that in itself, you know, diminishes their income that they get possession of. And also with regards to income redistribution, right? So in the book, Black Tax, sorry to just, go back, but I feel like it's important. In the book, they talk about Black tax being income redistribution in a way, you know, and talking about the fact that because we are in this position as a Black middle class of redistributing our income because of the inequalities that were perpetuated by the legacy of apartheid. Shouldn't this be the government's responsibility? And also this in turn raises a question that because we are in this situation because of such a legacy, why isn't the government responsible for this? Why don't we put in place things like the universal income to try and, uplift in some way? And another thing that I think can help with regards to generating wealth, I believe that as Black Africans, not all, not all, but yeah, not all. Let me just say not all. Financial literacy is a problem. So how about that also gets integrated into the curriculum to make sure that we level up to those who know, because knowledge is power. Yeah.
Thanks for that one, Debo. Yeah, for those of you who are asking, so all of the recordings of all the different sessions, because Lebo's making reference to another book club session that we had yesterday about black tax, it will be available on the NWU YouTube channel, and I'll also put it on the Fundi site when we're done with Race Awareness Week. I think maybe if it's okay, but please, anyone who is keen to keep the comments coming in the chat box, or you guys are more than welcome to raise your hand. We only have a few minutes left of the session. But I suppose I wanted to maybe just throw a spanner in the works and would be keen to hear what the panelists think about this, or anyone in the chats or the session. So very often, I think that there is a massive discussion, and rightly so, because we have, broadly speaking, a developmental state. I mean, there's much debates about what exactly is a developmental state, but we talk a lot about the importance of redistribution, and not just redistribution. I think that's a nice balance that's found in the book, that yes, we need to understand that there are inequalities, and that we need to address those inequalities. So we need very specific policies, social and economic policies to be put in place, but that redistribution in and of itself is not necessarily enough. And this is where the big debate is about. We need to grow our economy, but we need a certain type of growth that is inclusive. Whether that is actually possible to do, I don't know, we can debate that one. But I think very often in this discussion about the types of inequalities that we see in the country, especially when we look at them disaggregated according to race, is that we have a lot of pressure that we put on government. That government needs to provide, as Lebo said, maybe something like universal basic income. And has government done enough? And about the corruption that we find in government. But I would like us all to maybe just ask ourselves, what is the role that the private sector is playing in our country? And we saw this come through really strongly yesterday in one of the other Race Awareness Week sessions with Professor Nomalanga Mkhize, where she was asking, based on a look at our pre-colonial history, what is the role of the company in Africa? And so to just make the company a proxy for the private sector, I would be really eager to hear Josh, Lebo, Carike, Roslyn, anyone else. Do you not think that we need to ask ourselves questions about whether it's not just an easy scapegoat to say, well, we can't put this on the private sector because it's their job to maximize profits? And then I suppose the answer is, oh yes, but we have things like corporate social responsibility, which makes up a tiny fraction of budgets in the private sector, and in many instances are just tax write-offs. But I wonder if we sometimes don't put enough pressure on companies. Josh was talking about chapter 5, and we see the statistics that we have 1 in 5 top managers in companies are Black managers, right? So to ask ourselves questions about what is the role that the private sector should be playing in how we start to address the types of inequalities that we have in South Africa, and not just the government. We're not denying that they have a massively important role to play. But I wonder if we don't sometimes put too much focus on only that and don't ask ourselves these questions. So I don't know, is anyone keen to jump in on this one? I see Mario is. Mario, by all means.
Hello once again. I think we need to be fair. When we look at government, in most of the thing we have the BEE, and they're trying to address the inequality. and they have the platform. Private sector, it would be, for example, myself having a business. And you have a platform like government that is humongous, that is addressing the issues of Black people. They are doing corruption, that's why it is not happening accordingly. Now you expect white people also to give away the little that they have in the private sector, just to employ Black people. So my question then is, in South Africa, where are white people going to work? Those who have experience and they have to be in managerial posts. So I think we need to understand that as long as the government is not doing their part in the government, where, for example, let's say in government, a manager is Black, in another department, it's a white person, because we are trying to meet people halfway. Then in the private sector, we'll start looking at it that, you know what, you're also not employing enough white people in the position. We are not saying that they are doing well, but they are taking opportunity, because even in the government, nobody is taking care of that. And also, the other thing that I will add is that government itself, it's also wrong in terms of the labor, Department of Labor. Department of Labor knows some of the departments, I mean, of the companies that they don't employ white people. Most of our politicians, you find that they are directors, or they are shareholders, they are involved there. Hence, you'll find that the private sector is able to also bypass that BEE thing. Thank you.
Thanks so much for the contribution, Mario. Lebo, I see that you have your hand up.
Yeah, so with regards to what you said, Michelle, about the role of the private sector, I think I agree with you, but I believe that in order for the private sector to actually do something, they need to be approached. So if the government is not open to forming partnerships with the private sector to ensure that they chip in, to alleviate something, then that's not going to happen. You see, and I'd like to give an example with regards to, like, let's say, I know I'm deviating from poverty and inequality or whatever, but I would like to look at vaccines and this time of COVID. I believe that if the government, hypothetically speaking, takes all the burden of purchasing these vaccines, I believe that it will be difficult. It will put a strain on the fiscal budget. However, if they approached the private sector to chip in and medical aids to be like, you know what, people under medical aids, we will cover their vaccination, then that would, relieve the financial burden on the public sector. However, sometimes the public and private sector don't work together because the public sector does not, reach out to the private sector. So the problem is they must, reach out. You can't, expect something if you don't meet the other party. Yeah.
I just want to thank you, Lebo. I just want to read what Prof. Wilma here in the chat box. Anyone who wants to understand essay today, so beautiful yet so broken, a good and very interesting book to read is Future Tense, Reflection on the Troubled Land by Tony Leon. Thank you for that, Prof. So here's a suggestion also for us to go and have a look into this book, which Prof. Wilma is suggesting. I saw another message from Rashad. He said here, my LLM was on the Constitution and human rights and its implications for companies and private businesses. One of my conclusions was that legally, the profit motive should be abolished as far as it is in conflict with human rights. If we have a country whose entire legal system is to be subject to the Bill of Rights, it means that companies cannot be allowed to profit for their own personal gain as long as human rights go unfulfilled, especially when companies were caught to the oppression of colonialism and apartheid. which were economic systems, not merely political systems. This doesn't mean we should have wholesale takeovers by the state, which itself an oppressive colonial. A very strong viewpoint from Richard. Rather, it means that we need to re-envision the fundamental structuring of our economy, who should benefit from the accumulated capital built on the backs of people, especially Black people, past and present. I personally would say that all of us are the collective heirs of the world we were born into. Profit cannot morally or legally be just for few, much less than it is the same corporations that facilitated colonialism and apartheid. A strong view from Richard, but we appreciate it and it makes sense also. It gives us a lot of insight also.
Mm. Yeah, thanks so much for that one, Roslyn and Rashad. Rashad, I don't know if you're willing to, but I would be really keen to read your LLM. So, I mean, you could just email it, but if you, I don't know if others, they can just give like some thumbs up that are here in the Zoom room with us. Maybe we could post it on the Fundi site. If more people would be keen to read it, I myself personally would love to. So if you're okay to do that, Rashad, we could please post it on the Fundi. Okay, Rashad is saying that he would be happy to send it along. Maybe just, because I see the session is nearly winding down and we're almost going to do our lucky draw. I maybe wanted to ask Josh something as someone that, you know, I've lectured before, we've had lots of conversations. Lebo, you're also welcome to come in here, but I'm always keen to hear from like the young generation. Yeah. So Josh, I suppose my question to you is, you know, I grew up in a Afrikaans household, and a lot of people in maybe my immediate or even extended circle, I'm also 50% Portuguese, there would often be conversations when it's family gatherings about, you know, how difficult things have become for white people in South Africa because of, and then lots of misrepresentation of facts and stats and data. And so, you know, it took me, my own journey of wanting to investigate and better understand, not the data and statistics can always tell us everything, right? But it took me some time to divorce myself from that and kind of begin to grapple myself with what's actually going on, and better understand some of the complexities, even though it's a continual and ongoing process and journey. But I would be really keen to hear maybe about your own journey with like this uncomfortable realization of how you got to this point where, you know, what we've been trying to emphasize is to just be curious, to introspect a lot, to try and be reflective. I would be keen to hear your thoughts on that. And then perhaps, Lebo, so too, you know, your own journey and experience in how you begin to grapple with the economy and race relations. I would really be keen to hear from you both on that point. Josh, if you're open to it.
It's not a light switch, I don't think, but it's just the realization that you can't live in a silo. You can't just hear stories from your friends that are one race group or from your family. You need to get out there and you need to have discussions with people. I think people are awesome. If you actually just have a decent conversation with them and listen to their lived experience, that will start making you curious about their lives and how they find the world, how they've lived through their own life. And then you'll stop thinking, oh, I have these problems. They're so massive. There's people in the country that have way bigger problems than you will ever have. So the first step is just, I think, talking to people, getting out your own comfort zone, reading things like this book that you might not have typically read. Get as many perspectives and information as you can, and then reevaluate yourself and your own views, and just try be a good human being at the end of the day. I think that's the main thing. Just try to be a good person, listen to what people have to say and gather information so you have informed opinions, not just the opinions of everyone that shares the same viewpoints as you, because it might end up skewed at the end of the day. Do you want to add in there, Lebo?
Yeah, I believe that you said most of it, but just to add, also, just like in the book, you know, subtly encourages us to be, it's being open-minded. I believe that it is also important to be open-minded because we do have our own biases, but to look beyond that and be critical, be curious of your surroundings, of other people's experiences, and all of that, and also not accepting everything at face value. Yeah, that's also a very important part of it. Yeah, that's all.
Thank you so much, Lebo, and also for Josh for sharing your input. I just quickly wanted to read because I think Nhlakanipho was raising an important point in the comments. Just before that, Karu invited us to consider about the issue of corporations or state and who should be doing what. Does this not just come down to who makes the decisions about the way forward? Most of what government decides to do is ultimately funded by the private sector through taxation of companies and their consumers. And then after that, Nhlakanipho was letting us know, I come from a predominantly white school in town. Something that I only noticed when I got older was that in most cases, and even at school, including now in varsity, is that most people of color and their cultures and identities, including myself, are drowned out and are not recognized by white people. One tends to find themselves trying to fit into white culture. Example, I see this today in sports teams and or the best education institutions, job, etc. Is it possible to maybe discuss if there's some way we could overcome issues like these? Thank you very much for those contributions. And I think that is what, it reminds me of what Ferial was talking about in her book when she discusses as a young woman starting out in the world of work and realizing that all of these networking events and things where there was a particular culture and way of doing things felt very exclusive. And then she had to find a way to fit into that. And perhaps that is something that if we're talking about corporations, maybe that's a contribution that corporations can make, not so much in terms of how much they pay or fund, although that's important as well, but maybe that's a call for corporations to be a little bit introspective about corporate cultures and how we make place for these kinds of more inclusive cultures in our institutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Carike. I think we can move on now to the lucky draw. Nhlakanipho, are you there? We don't have so much time left here. I think 10 minutes. So we just want to move to the lucky draw so that the lucky one can know, or the lucky student number can know what they want. Okay, you can proceed.
Morning, everyone. Hope everyone's having a great day. My name is Lodewyk. I'm currently studying at nwu-pukke, doing my honors in risk management. Today I'll be doing the lucky draw. I've got all the student numbers here. And yeah, basically I'll be doing that right now, just for clarity's sake, so everyone can see. And the lucky number is 234-95642. To repeat that, that is 234-95642. I'll put the student's name and student number in the chat box below, just for clarity's sake. Hope everyone enjoys the rest of their day. Bye.
Thanks so much, Nhlakanipho. Yes, so Hilary is going to put the student number in the chat, and the Race Awareness Week team will be in touch with the winner for them to get their 10 gigs of data. I think Roslyn's going to close off the session for us in a second. I just wanted to quickly make a recommendation based on the comment that Nhlakanipho had just made. So there is an amazing scholar. Her name is Iman Zainal Abdin. She's actually originally an Ethiopian scholar, and she talks so much about what Nhlakanipho has just raised, which is this idea of cultural hybridity, and this idea of the meshing that there is between cultures because of the influence of colonialism. So, you know, how we accept that cultural hybridity has happened, but how do we make sure that there is just not this complete westernization of all cultures? And then she also has some great analysis about how that spills over into our economies, and how we think about things like rationality, utility maximization, profitability of companies. So, I mean, if anyone is keen, I could also post an article or two of hers on the Ifundi site. I just wanted to say, because I think Kakanipo's made such a great point there. Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Roslyn's going to close off for us.
Okay, I see Lebogang is, oh, okay, you're saying sharp. Okay, no, cool. I want to thank everybody on the panel this morning. Thank you for all your insight. I also learned a lot from each and every one of you. We want to even thank everybody that joined this session. We really appreciate all the interest and everybody that gave their view on the book. And we are looking forward to see how everything is going to fall into place by taking this new knowledge with us wherever we go, so that we can maybe some change can come somewhere, if I can say that. But I just want to remind everybody that there will be a session tomorrow, Michelle, at 10. It's the Lobola one. Am I correct, Michelle?
Yes, perfect, Roslyn.
Yeah.
So that'll be the that'll be the
Okay.
last session. Is at 10 o'clock tomorrow. We're going to be discussing Lobola. And there's also going to be the announcement of the winners of the spoken word poetry competition. There's more than like 300 votes already, but voting is closing at 1 o'clock. So if anyone is keen to still vote, please do so. We're going to announce the winners tomorrow. And then if anyone is interested, we do also have a session at 1 o'clock, which is a cross-disciplinary panel looking at the intersection of race and gender, queerness, precarity, and economics. So it's like a very diverse panel. If anyone is keen to do so, then you can join us at 1 o'clock as well. All the emails have gone out, but if anyone wants to quickly sign up and they haven't yet, just sign up. I'll get the email and I'll send you through the Zoom details. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.